Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, where the topic is what primes want from their subcontractors. And it's really focused on NIST 800-171, self-assessments, SPRS scoring, and the whole journey and path to CMMC. We've got three of us here today: John Ellis, Ron Davis, and myself, Scott Armstrong, will be the moderator. First, a little bit of housekeeping before we get into the agenda. Today's webinar is scheduled to last anywhere from 45 minutes to an hour. Will close off at the hour if it goes that long. That includes our Q&A. All participants will be muted so that the speakers can have our conversations, discussions, and present without interruption. A large portion of today's event is dedicated to answering questions that have come in advance from the audience. So we're going to be answering many of those questions today, and we'll be having both John and Ron take questions, those questions. In case of an outage, please just wait for a minute and refresh the page. We've not had this yet, but we just like to keep our fingers crossed there. For your convenience, we've also got a link in the YouTube description that's got a glossary of commonly used terms and acronyms and initializations that are referenced during today's webinar. I know a lot of the folks on the call probably aren't inside the beltway, so to speak, and we tend to use a lot of acronyms, so we've got that as a reference for you. Today's webinar is also going to be recorded and available on demand via the Exostar resource library post-event as well from the same YouTube link. And if you have additional questions or follow-up that you want or want a copy of the slide deck, please just reach out to us at cmmc-team@exostar.com. Or you can use the live chat feature on our website as well, and we can help collaborate and get you some additional answers. So for the agenda, we're going to cover introductions, and then we're going to have John take the lead and talk about SPRS in some of those aspects. Ron will come next and give his perspectives on some of those topics, and then we're really going to get into the meat of it with the Q&A around the questions that have been submitted. So we're very privileged today to have John Ellis with us. He'll be starting. He's currently the director of DCMA's software division that's responsible for the policy, training, and tools used by the agency's software professionals in the conduct of their activities, which includes the application of cybersecurity contract requirements and policies. He's a retired Army colonel, served on active duty for more than 30 years. So thank you for your service, John. And he's also become a member of the Army Acquisition Corps in 1995 and has had a variety of assignments since then. Ron, he's coming from the industry side of things, where he's currently the Chief Information Security Officer at Huntington Ingalls Industry, or HII, we commonly refer to it. And he's got over 20 years of experience in information security and IT, heavily within the DoD defense sector. He oversees the company's information security program in areas such as cybersecurity policy, risk management, governance, as well as incident response. And he's held similar roles in his past as well. And we're very pleased to have both of these individuals with us today. I'm Scott Armstrong. I happen to be responsible for risk applications that we host at Exostar, and heavily involved in all things related to CMMC and 171 compliance from an industry perspective as well. John, over to you.
Hey, good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you may be. It's a pleasure to be here with you guys today. Obviously, there's a lot of interest in what's going on with 800-171 assessments and the progression and evolution to CMMC. So it's a pleasure to be here today to talk about some of those things, address some of those matters, and really to have an open dialogue about what's on people's minds. So as everybody recalls, back in November, the Department of Defense issued what we call an interim rule that introduced three new requirements. Those three requirements was the 7019, 20, and 21 clauses. And 7019 directed the Defense Industrial Base to start loading self-assessments against the DoD assessment methodology, loading self-assessments into a system called SPRS, the Supplier Performance Risk System. Prior to that, that direction. There was only a handful, a couple hundred assessments in the system. Most of those entered by the Department of Defense folks, mostly my folks at DCMA, with some help from on the Navy side as well. But the voluntary loading of scores had been pretty low at that point from industry. It had always been there, just not many companies took up the offer. Since then, over 11,000 companies have placed their scores in the systems. I was just in the system a couple days ago and looked, and it's getting close to about 11,500 various reports were in the system. So that's showing good progress. I will tell you those scores matter because they're part of an overall risk assessment that procurement officials, contracting officers, PMs, et cetera, can use to assess risk of how they're doing business and the conduct and execution of their contracts. And so think about it this way. If you're doing business with a company that either doesn't have a score, which is required now, or they have a particularly poor score, if you're performing your due diligence, then you might want to look at different options and think about other ways of getting the mission accomplished with somebody that's possibly doing better. Why your score improvement matters is tied directly to that. Procurement officials are going to look for improvement in where a company may have started, and then as they lean forward and start getting more towards full compliance and that maximum score of 110. It is really important that everybody understands that while the SPRS scoring reflects the 800-171 scoring criteria, that same 800-171 requirement is smack in the middle of CMMC with level 3. So if you're going to be a future company that operates at the CMMC level 3 level, meaning you handle controlled unclassified information, or CUI, or some people call it CUI, that this doesn't roll off my tongue very well. But if you're handling CUI, you're going to need at least a level 3 certification in the future. To achieve at least a level 3 certification, you will need to fully implement all of 800-171's 110 requirements, plus the additional 20 requirements required by CMMC level 3. That diligence and that consistency will help you get to that high score. So if you're operating somewhere, less than 110 requirements now, 110 points now, you can use your POAMs and that scoring mechanism to update yourself, to show progression over time, to hold yourself accountable, and to demonstrate to your government partners that you're making progress improving your cybersecurity posture. One of the things that keeps coming up, though, with SPRS in general, and I just want to foot stomp this point, in SPRS, you, a company, can only see your own scores. If you need to share scores between primes and subs, that needs to be taken offline, and we can talk more about that in the question and answer session. But it's really important that primes understand something in terms of a government relationship, because primes want to know if their suppliers can protect information. When there's an issue with a contract in terms of cybersecurity, the government will talk to the prime about the issue. We typically will not talk to the supplier, because we have a contractual relationship with the prime. The prime, however, may want to have a conversation with its suppliers in the eventual, communication regarding an incident if should one occur. And in that case, it should be quite all right for the two parties to have a discussion and be, forthright about what each is bringing to the table in terms of readiness. So overall, the SPRS requirement, while it is a new requirement to direct those scores go in, it is not a new thing. It has been around in a voluntary status, but industry has done a great job of taking up that requirement and getting scores into the system.
Awesome. Great. Thanks for that, John. Ron, do you have some thoughts that you'd like to extend on these topics?
Yeah, thank you for that, Scott. So, and good afternoon, everybody, or good morning or good evening, wherever you are. I just wanted to talk a little bit about, why, we think it's important that you can protect, not just, Huntington Ingalls intellectual property, but also your intellectual property, as well as be compliant with the security requirements for CMMC. This journey didn't just start last year. This was in the making since back in 2015. And I think when the DoD and large primes came together to understand what are some of the basic requirements that are needed for not just primes but also suppliers to protect intellectual property, we came up with the NIST 800-171. The point is this: we've seen in the news lots of attacks, from nation-state actors. We've seen attacks from ransomware actors. The concern for us as a prime is that we want our subs to be able to protect their data so that we could continue to deliver against our mission with the Department of Defense and any other customer that we have today. It is important, it is imperative that we implement security across the entire defense industrial base so that we can become more robust in the way we deliver services to our government customer. And I just want to say, when we talk today about, CMMC level 3, keep in mind this is just what we consider the nominal level of security that's required for any company to protect not just CUI data, but their own company intellectual property. So this will benefit you as well. Back to you, Scott.
All right, great. That was a great thing there, Ronnie. Now I'm going to switch over to the Q&A format where we'll go through some of our pre-submitted questions. And as you can expect, there's quite a few that are on SPRS. We've got some on CUI and some other topics. I'll start with question number 2 that relates to the SPRS system in PIEE, which is the system that's got accounts, I believe, for SPRS. So the person wanted to know if they could self-assess or not, and they've tried to get access, but they still haven't been granted access. I've got a couple of questions around this. And John, this one's over to you. Like, if they're struggling to get through to figure out how to deal with SPRS and get accounts and all that kind of stuff, what are your thoughts on that and recommendations?
Oh, absolutely. So, and this has come up a time or two. So if the viewers recall earlier, there was a screen capture that showed what the SPRS website looks like. On that image on that site, there's links to the PII or PIEE and the SPRS help desk. If it's an account issue, getting credentials established, you start with the PIEE help desk. And then once you have your credentials, if you're having system specific, concerns or problems, you can contact the SPRS folks. So if you're talking to your DCMA counterparts, or just happen to be in contact with like one of our DIBCAC personnel, just keep in mind, we do not control those systems. It's a DoD system managed by the Navy. It's a great platform. Those guys do a great work, but it's not inconceivable to have problems. So use those help desk resources before you go any farther, and they're generally very, very responsive.
All right, thanks so much. The next question has, so after the subcontractors uploaded their score in SPRS, what's the next step? What happens next? And Ronnie, I'll throw this one to your side so I can give the HII perspective on it, and then we can follow with John just with any additional thoughts. That's question number 3.
I appreciate it. Thank you, Scott. So HII will request that information, and we actually leverage Exostar today for NIST 800-171. But we'll request that information as part of our work with suppliers in the performance of a contract. So if we know that you're handling, say, for example, CMMC level 3. We're not going to talk about 4 and 5 today, really, because there's still a lot of gray area there. But if you're CMMC level 3, we're going to ask you questions around how you meet those specific requirements. We'll document that, and we will evaluate whether you can meet compliance for handling CUI or not.
If I could, Scott, on that topic, a couple things. So folks don't need to, your hair doesn't need to get set on fire yet, because CMMC is in its initial rollout phases, and it's going to phase in over the next 5 years. So there's not a big demand immediately for folks to get CMMC level anything certified. However, you need to be planning and looking forward to be ready when that time comes, for your own interest. So from a prime to supplier perspective, keep in mind that companies can only see their own information in SPRS. So if you're HII, then HII can see their scores and only their scores. What Ron was really talking about was they do business with suppliers, and they have to flow those requirements down to their suppliers. And you know what, boys and girls, at the end of the day, you've done a self-assessment, and that self-assessment should be used to help have that conversation to go back to your prime and say, look, we have performed our due diligence. We have documented our scores in SPRS because we also act as a prime in other cases. And here's our results, and here's where we stand. That way, both the prime and the supplier can be talking from a common perspective about where they're at from a security perspective. This 800-171 assessment methodology that we're using today, that is the basis of those scores that go into SPRS, it's not just beneficial to the government to know that companies are doing what they need to do, but primes can use the very same info to assure their prime customers that they're meeting those requirements as well. And you don't have to go recreate the wheel to respond to the primes. So if a guy like Ron's reaching out to you asking for that information, do yourself a favor, share the information with them. Don't be afraid to have that discussion and be open about it. It's better for all of us if we're all protecting the information. That controlled unclassified information, it's designated that way for a reason. And this is how we ensure that we keep that information secure.
So
John,
the
if
next,
I could add,
go ahead, Ronnie.
I'm sorry. Yeah, if I can add one more thing for this. So one of the things that we're required to do as a prime contractor is to ensure that we perform the due diligence around our suppliers meeting compliance with NIST 800-171. So for us, we're not gonna, we don't come in and do any sort of assessment or audit. We're gonna trust the information that you provide us. We leverage Exostar today for the assessment or for the review of questions around NIST 800-171. That information that will be provided in that questionnaire will be very similar to what you've provided to tally your score within the SPRS system. So just wanted to share that. It's not new information that you're going to be using. It's exactly the same.
And Ronnie, I'll just add something there for that particular form that many of the people in this audience probably are submitting their information to the primes. We're doing an update on it later this week, so that there's going to be a few additional questions where we're going to be asking, have you submitted your SPRS score? And what was the date of it, and a few additional things. Now, we are offering the suppliers the ability to share their score with the primes, but it's optional because some people might not want to, and that'll be a feature that the suppliers will be seeing in coming weeks when they do their updates. And the one thing that I'll mention, and John, you mentioned this a little bit earlier about assuming that people aren't at a perfect 110 score today, that means that we've got POAMs in place and they've got a system security plan that needs to be maintained and updated as they remediate and take care of the POAMs. They ideally should be knocking down the POAMs, updating their SPRS score, as well as updating it for the primes, so the primes can see that progress and that they're moving along. It's been pretty shocking to some people, I think, as have been scoring themselves, seeing that they're not quite at 110 yet. But I think you've got to look at it as a journey and keep knocking it down, not just like a one-time exercise.
Yes, sir. And let me add one other comment, and I'm sure Ronnie shares this concern as well. If you're going to load a score into the system, please make sure it is a valid score. If you claim that you're operating at fully operational, you've implemented all 110 requirements, and your score is 110, and you believe that, that's fine. I would recommend, however, if you're not, that you score yourselves accordingly. You do not want to give a false impression, whether it's to the government or to a prime, that you're operating at a level that you're really not operating at in the event there is an incident. Not trying to sound threatening or doom and gloom or anything, but making such claims can have consequences. Should it be considered to be a fraudulent claim, a fraudulent documentation of status going forward. So that's something to keep in mind. Be fair to yourself, hold yourself accountable for anything you've not fully implemented, and continue to work on getting those requirements fully implemented, because you will need to do so under the CMMC model as it continues to evolve.
Roger that. I'll go on to question number 5. And I'll start with you on this, John, then we'll go to Ronnie. Are there any programs to help small businesses, SMBs, get up to speed with like one-on-one guidance, discounted software? In general, what are the resources that could be out there, whether from the government or industry, for folks to look at?
Oh, absolutely. So many folks on the call that may be interested or be aware of a program called Project Spectrum. I believe it's managed it's a DoD small business activity. It has a lot of resources, particularly for small business. There's other DoD state and local resources, the PTACs and PTAPs and those folks. But at the end of the day, I do want to foot stomp something, because the question did go down sort of a product path, as the panelists know, and just make sure the members in the call know. Us government guys, we don't recommend products, we don't endorse products, and should there be questions about product specific things during the conduct of our interview and panel today, I will generally defer those to my industry counterparts. But in general, there are a number of resources out there. I implore you to take a look at those. There's also a thing called the DoD Procurement Toolbox. Many of you may be familiar with. It'll have links and resources to documents and other things that might be useful, to include a tool that helps with you generating your own system security plan, should you need to do so.
On to you, Ronnie. Do you have some thoughts about programs and what people can do resource-wise? I've got a few thoughts I'll throw in as well.
Yeah, so I would recommend that you look at any one of those authorized third parties, that assessors that can come in and take a look at your information and help you and give you guidance. But you would want to go to the CMMC Accreditation Board and website and take a look and see what information is there related to any help around guidance related to CMMC and how you get up to speed. Quite frankly, for a prime, we also need to pay attention to CMMC as well, because we will have to be accredited. So I've already been to the site and taken a look at who's out there and who I can leverage to help me on the path if I need to go to, say, level 5.
All right, good. And just so the viewers know, in the presentation today, we've also got several links to a lot of these resources that we're talking about, so that you'll be able to see them, whether it's the toolbox and some other things we talk about. Now, the one thing I will mention is that Exostar does have some low-cost solutions that are truly kind of targeted to the SMB. One certification assistant that consolidates a lot of the information from the AB, the guidance and things like that, to help streamline and ease the process of going through it. And we've got something called Policy Pro as well, which helps on the IT policy side, making sure they're in alignment with both 171 and CMMC up to level 3. But I still think, as Ronnie, as you mentioned, a lot of people still need third-party assistance. And that's where the CMMC AB is definitely a place where they've got people that are called registered provider organizations. And that's where organizations that are registering with the AB, and they'll go through training and get certified. Exostar ourselves has come up with a CMMC consulting partner program where it's really a subset of those people that we've vetted out that we know are skilled in the art of doing work in the DoD space. And you know, there's a lot of people out there that can fit different size budgets as well. I'll put it that way. There's small security boutiques that are skilled as well as larger firms. So there's definitely help that's out there.
Hey, Scott, if I could, before you go to the next question, I just want to say something, whether Ronnie meant to send the telegraph the pass or not, he said something incredibly important. So in his capacity working at HII, he's looking at, he knows the kind of work his company does. He knows the types of programs that they support. And quite honestly, he's doing exactly what he should be doing to assess, you know, the readiness of his networks and, you know, his enterprise environment to meet the totality of those requirements going forward. You know, while a majority of the work that a company like HII performs is likely, you know, only needs the CUI, you know, CMMC level 3 levels of protection, he definitely has stuff that may need something beyond that. So keeping that sort of leaning forward mindset in mind, companies generally know the kind of work that they perform and the types of contracts that they've historically have done work on and the types of work they would like to get into. So use those CMMC AB resources, use resources like the ones that'll be linked with this video today, and use that to help prepare yourself to put you on that glide path to get the eventual certification in place that you're going to need to do the types of work that you do. It does not happen overnight. It takes planning, it takes preparation. And then quite honestly, in the conduct of an assessment, what an assessor, whether it's somebody from DCMA, it's somebody from the Navy, or under CMMC, it's one of the certified third-party assessor organizations. Those guys are all going to look for the same evidence that's laid out in 800-171 Alpha and the CMMC assessment guides. They're going to look for evidence that you're actually doing the things that you say you're doing. Can you demonstrate that you're following your own policies and practices? Are you actually can you actually demonstrate that, you know, the term I use, can you eat your own dog food? Are you doing the things that you claimed you were doing? And it takes time to put those practices and policies in place, as I'm sure somebody like Ronnie can attest to in a company as large as HII. You don't just snap your fingers and institute a new policy overnight. Some of these things take some thought. They may not be particularly hard, but at the end of the day, you got to be able to actually do the things that you say you're doing. Thank you.
All right, I'm going to move on to question number 6. And this comes from a subcontractor, and they're trying to understand which of the vendors in their supply chain, as it goes downstream from them, need to be dealing with CMMC, whether CMMC level 1 or higher over time. And I guess you could even extend it to say with 171 with CUI. How does the supplier deal with that? Or any thoughts? And I'll toss that to you first, John.
Absolutely. So the magic of the flow down is tied to the types of information that you share with the suppliers. Now, before I get into that, there is somewhat of a misnomer in terms of where does CUI come from? CUI does not just come from the government being provided to a prime. CUI is often developed by a supplier provided back to a prime. It's developed by a prime provided either to a supplier or back to the government, or it can originate with the government and then it could inflow from the prime to a sub to a tier 3 supplier as one example. The need of what certification level or what flow down is needed is dependent on the type of information that's being shared and the requirement follows the CUI in this example as far as the CUI goes. So if the CUI goes 1 level deep, so be it. If it goes 5 levels deep, so be it. It's all a matter of what information is flowing to who, and that's where it's critically important that both the government and primes and suppliers, for that matter, that have information flow to them, know what information they have and who they're sharing it with. Thank you.
Your perspective on that question with the flow down through the kind of end tier of the suppliers, Ronnie? Any thoughts there?
Yeah, so, you know, just from a prime perspective, you know, if you have the 7012 clause in your contract, chances are, very high chances, you're going to have to handle CUI. Now, you know, the question becomes, you know, at the lower levels, do we have to flow it down? Absolutely. Now, to John's point, we don't know if something is made at the, you know, the third party or the fourth party level, if there is going to be CUI in there. But I use a simple sort of rule as I think about CUI. If you're making a product today and you have to, and you're selling that out on the commercial market, that's considered a cost product. If, you know, in the performance of a contract, we give you specific technical specs around that particular product that you're making, very high chances, high probability that is going to be CUI. Because think of it this way, we're trying to protect the data across the entire supply chain. If the bad guys attack the entire supply chain and collect, you know, the bolts, the specs of the bolts, the specs for the landing gear, et cetera, then what you can do is you can actually pull all those things together and recompile the entire spec of the capability that we're trying to deliver to the government. So that being said, if you have technical specs that are different from your COTS products, chances are that that's going to be CUI. So those 7012 requirements are going to flow all the way down. And if you do develop CUI, then you're going to have to label it as CUI. But one thing I wanted to point out, if you have a question on it, call your prime, and if your prime has a question on it, they should call their prime, and then it'll get all the way back up to the government, and we will ask the question directly to the government and then flow that information back down.
That's a great point. That leads into the next question. I'm going to throw that question to you, John. So the question is number 8, where on CUI, they say, I'm not seeing docs that are marked as CUI. Maybe it is, maybe I think it is. And it says, when will primes be implementing this CUI nomenclature? But it gets back to the problem of what is CUI and what do you do if you're unsure about it? Just from your perspective, what would you recommend?
So Ronnie gave the absolute best possible answer there is. If you see something and it looks like CUI and it smells like CUI and it's not marked CUI, go back and have a conversation with whoever provided it to you, whether that's the prime or the government. And honestly, you can't go wrong by asking for that clarification. And it's really, really important, you know, and I'll even dissect it a little farther. You know, in some of the scenarios like Ronnie was talking about providing information or knowing what piece of information is going to who, if you don't need to send, for example, an entire tech data package to a supplier and they only need 1 page of the document, I know this sounds silly, but send them the 1 page. Don't send them the entire document. By doing so, you're putting all of that information at risk. Yeah, it can be inconvenient to have to parse that information that way, but you're protecting your own self-interest and you're protecting the interest of your supplier, to be honest with you, by only giving them the information they need. But I can't stress this enough. If you see something that looks somewhat out of place, you think it should be marked differently, by all means, ask the question. That's the only way we're going to resolve some of this. And I'll turn it back over to you guys.
All right, thanks. I'm going to lead into another question, and there's several related to this, but I've seen it quite often in talking with suppliers. Question 11, how can an ultra small company with extremely limited human resources really deal with this? And in their profile, they said, we don't have IT staff. It's outsourced to a small local company, and it's a 12-person company. I've seen this with almost, a whole range of people where they're very small, could be a machine shop or something else, and they outsource their IT. Uh, Thoughts on your side, John, and then we'll go to Ronnie. Then I'll throw in some more thoughts.
Oh, absolutely. So our DIBCAC, our Defense Industrial Base Cybersecurity Assessment Center, that entity that we created at DCMA a couple of years ago now, has actually performed assessments of very, very small companies that are out there performing work on behalf of the Department of Defense. And I'm gonna ask folks to take a step back from being too worked up about what's actually in 800-171. If you've not looked at the document itself, and Ronnie said it earlier, it represents the basic things that any company should do to protect its own intellectual property, let alone to protect the CUI of the government. The requirements that are in there are scalable to be able to be met by those very small companies. You just have to look at the requirements for what they are. Don't let them scare you. I'm sitting right now in my home office. To my left is my home server. I can tell you that, theoretically, I'm operating at a 800-171 level. The thing I needed to buy was a YubiKey so I could do multi-factor authentication. Now, I'm not exaggerating very much. The requirements as they're specified in the document, being 800-171, are scalable from the very, very, very small to the very, very, very large. So you can't get too worked up about that. You have to look at the resources you have. You have to look at the risk that you're willing to accept, whether you're using outsourced IT staff or you're using in-house. All those things can be managed, and they can fit into meeting your 800-171 requirements, big or small. So don't let that ever scare you away. It's not as bad as it seems. Most folks, after they've actually looked at the requirements, realize, oh yeah, this is stuff I should have been doing anyway. And they're just documenting it and being able to assess how well they're doing that. Over.
All right, on to you, Ronnie. For your, when you see the really small guys, what do you recommend as options for them for their resource constrained?
Yeah. So, to John's point earlier, a lot of this stuff we should be doing anyway, right? I mean, let's think that John talk about, he's got his printer, he's got his YubiKey. These are things that you got to do. You got to have antivirus, you got to patch your systems. I mean, even if you didn't have a business, you would be doing this at home anyway. But there's help. There are small companies out there that can read and interpret these requirements and explain them to you and explain what they would mean in terms of what you would have to implement. I know there are some folks, they're very sort of finance focused, they're not technically focused, but there are folks out there that can help you. I'm not going to provide any names, but I mean, it's an easy search on the internet to find a reputable firm that can interpret the requirements for you. As I said before, CMMC level 3, fairly basic interpretation. When you start talking about level 5, it gets a little bit more complicated. You start talking about things like full packet capture. That's all, and trusted platform modules and things of that nature. That's all very complicated, but there's help out there. And then also, we work with Exostar, and we have a process whereby we reach out to some of our critical suppliers, and we ask them, we try to partner with them to understand what are some of the challenges. You can certainly, if you have a requirement that you cannot understand, you can always ask one of our guys, hey, what does this mean? We'll be happy to share that with you. In addition to, I think Exostar also provides some information in that regard as well. Over.
And thanks, Ronnie. And yes, we do provide a lot of information, and even in our we do monthly workshops for people that use our different solutions. And I got to tell you, sometimes it's surprising where we take something for granted, like multi-factor authentication. One of the questions that I had just in the last 2 weeks is username and password, does that count for two-factor authentication? And the answer was no, your username's not part of it. That's where, I use the smartphone scenario where you need something else after the password, whether it's the phone OTP. With a smartphone, most people use biometrics as another factor and things like that. So that's where sometimes people just don't have, they start reading the NIST things and it seems to be Greek to them the first time they read it. The one thing I will say, if they're working with an outsourced IT provider, they should really talk to them about the regulatory requirements with that outsourced company, because that's going to be with CMMC part of that assessment and part of that capability. And especially if you're dealing with CUI and they're not familiar with it and it's Greek to that service provider, then I would go down the path of, engaging with a firm that can support your needs, whether it's, outsourced IT, a consultant to come in and do that assessment to help work with that firm or something else. That's where I know our consulting partners I've mentioned before, or some of the folks that you'd find on the AB site as consultants, those are the sort of people that are also there to help you go down that path. Now, I've seen sometimes where they work with those outsourced IT providers as well. So,
Hey, Scott, let me add one other thing. So for the viewers today, don't think that we've actually coordinated, our responses to some of this stuff. But I do want to piggyback on something that Ronnie said that I have had the pleasure of witnessing on many of an occasion. Some of the larger companies that are in the defense industrial base really do act in a leadership capacity for the DIB. Each of those companies have incredible cyber resources. They have great folks that are incredibly knowledgeable. And I'm going to say something, and Ronnie, try not to get embarrassed. But these guys are genuinely helpful. So if you're a small company that's doing business with these larger companies and you need their advice, and I have seen any number of instances where folks like Ronnie, his peers at other large companies have made themselves available, made their staffs available to help those smaller companies that they're doing business with to better understand what they need to do. The cooperation I've seen amongst the industry side of the family, in the greater defense industrial base, including the government, has been nothing but reassuring that we get it. What we do is a team sport. We understand that, an insecure supply chain does impact negatively our overall supply chain. It impacts the primes, it impacts the government. We know it takes us all to do this, to do it right, to get it right. And I would encourage you to reach out and talk to your peers to get some of that help when you just need to ask somebody a question. These guys have been exceptional, and I want to give them credit for that. Over.
that's good to hear, John. That's very good to hear. I'm going to go on
Thank you,
to a question. It was question 12, but I think it actually has come up in a couple different ways, and that's with the cost. So this is, going to cost people, depending on what level they get to, different levels of cost and things like that. How does that get shared with primes? Is it just coming out of the pocket of the people in the DIB? Just what is the theory of how the cost gets shared? And Ronnie, I'll start with you, and then maybe we'll switch to John on that front.
Okay, sure. So if you receive a contract or a solicitation that has CMMC, level 3 and NIST 801 requirements, I would expect that you would work to meet those requirements, and whatever that increase in cost is, you would actually include that in your rate to my organization, and then as I compile that information, I'll include those rates to the government in my response to the government. So it's not as though you're sort of out there on your own. You have to eat this cost, and all of a sudden you're sort of in a difficult position from a competitive standpoint, we expect, and I think the government expects, not to take anything away from John, but we expect that you would include those additional costs in your rates going forward. Over.
So let me add, Ronnie just gave the exact right answer, and would almost word for word would be what I would say. We expect to see it in the rates. And so I'm going to address one other aspect of that. So some folks are going to wonder, well, hey, if I have to raise my rates to account for this, am I going to price myself out of the market? Everybody on this call, if you're doing work in the defense industrial base, should be taking what we just said into account, and it applies to all of your rates. If you want to get right down to it, it applies to all of us. It's sort of one of those things where the water will rise or fall for all of us at the same time. If we're taking this seriously, if we're exercising our due diligence, this is something that just should be a matter of, making those adjustments and applying it to the rates as Ronnie indicated. That's how this gets done. That's the full expectation. And I think it's been addressed many, many times in multiple industry forums. And I don't see that as a significant issue going forward. Over.
All right, good news, good news. I've got a question, and this was number 17. It's about international manufacturers or suppliers that could be materials or something else. So really, when you think about the defense industrial base, it's not just the US, it can almost be global when you start looking at it. So how do these requirements, how are they going to be affected, whether from 171 or CMMC? And I'll start with you, John, on that one.
So the good news is a lot of effort has gone into establishing relationships with the various international government relationships that the U.S. DoD has with its its partner nations and allies around the globe. So I won't address specifics country by country because obviously that takes away from our time here. But needless to say, it's all about where does the CUI go, who it gets shared with, and then what are the specific mechanisms in the clauses to take on that work. That requirement doesn't go away just because there's an international aspect of the supply chain. So 7012 ends up in international contracts. CMMC will end up in international contracts. The mechanics for how some of those relationships between our international partners may vary only slightly, but rest assured going forward, there's a lot of interest in CMMC, not just by the United States Department of Defense, not just by the United States government. A lot of folks have realized, both in and outside of the US, that there's value in this methodology, and that there are other programs out there that are similar. Reciprocity rules and requirements are being negotiated. At the end of the day, I think it goes back to what we were just talking about with rates. It's the same sort of thing. The governments around the globe, many that we do business with, realize the goodness of having some mechanism to ensure that our supply base is secure. And the CMMC is our way of doing that, and others are piling on to take advantage of that. Over.
Ron, your thoughts on that on the international front?
Sure. So yeah, so you have a contract that has the 7012 clause in it. Obviously, you're going to have to flow it down. When I look at the question, it talks about certain material maybe affected and their sole source. You still have to flow the clause down all the way through to the international manufacturer. The question is, are they producing CUI? And then the other question is, there may be potential ITAR restrictions, and I know this is a CMMC NIST 800-171 DFARS discussion, but you have to be careful about that. So I will tell you, you don't want to, have a contract that has 7012 in it, and you're pulling material from a country, overseas. I don't want to call out that country name. I don't want to get into any challenges there, but we all know that, there are Itsar restrictions on CUI. So, but if this country that this person asked a question about is, we can share, there's an agreement to share that information such as CUI, absolutely, CUI, CMMC requirements will be applicable there as well.
Hey, Scott, if I could, I just want to add one quick thing. Ronnie's ITAR example is a great one. Chances are, ladies and gentlemen, if you're dealing with an ITAR restricted piece of information, you can almost assuredly expect it as CUI, and you should probably handle it that way. The notion of dealing with other contract clauses, other prohibited sources, all the other, the rare earth metal, all those other clauses and stuff are outside the bounds of this conversation. However, to Ronnie's point, you still got to do all those things too. So don't lose sight of the fact, and your contracting staff should be aware of, all the various clauses and the restrictions that come with that. That's all part of the mix in this, whole endeavor as well. So just wanted to foot stomp that point to make sure folks don't assume away that, hey, CMMC and CUI may help clean up some of those other contracting restrictions. That is not the case. Those are all independent requirements. There can be some overlap, obviously, but we're not going to debate those today.
Got it. I'm going to go on to a question that's going to go to you, Ronnie, number 22, and it relates to, is there an update coming this summer that may push the assessments further out? And I think they're probably talking about the pilot assessments and activities that your organization might be involved with. So any insight you can just give on the progress there?
So I really think this is a one for John to discuss, but I'll just share that my understanding is that there are pilots that are going to be scheduled this calendar year. I don't exactly know when, but I'll defer to John on that.
Thanks, Ron. I called the wrong one there. It's on to you, John.
It's all good. So as far as I'm tracking, the 5-year rollout pilot phase and all the activities that have been published and all over the interwebs, we're still tracking to the plan. We will see a pilot program, if you will. Assessments begin this summer. I believe Ms. Lord actually put out a press release. I seem to recall it was January, where selected programs had been designated to take part in the initial rollout of CMMC. All those actions are underway. And I don't see any major impediments. If there is a shift, it would be relatively minor, but I fully expect that we will be proceeding. I do know for a fact that work is underway to put, the right contract language in place and release it accordingly. So as far as I'm tracking and aware, we are on target.
All right, and that's everything that I've heard as well. And we had a question like, what are the pilots? I know DoD has done a press release, I think back in the December, like listing out which the pilots are going to be. There might have been another one or two of those added, but I know a simple, if you want to know which of those pilots that they are, a simple Google search just for CMMC pilot contracts, it'll be in the top 5 links for sure, based upon just public DoD information. All right, so here's a question, and it goes on to CUI, and we've only got time for a few more, but they're a manufacturer, this is question 33, that handles CUI, mostly drawings from a prime contractor. And when they receive it, the engineer creates a less detailed drawing with no part numbers to be able to send to a machine shop for machining the parts. So the original drawing is not sent. Something else is sent that's been modified a bit to try to clean it up from that CUI perspective. So is this thing they're sending on considered CUI? Because the drawing's got to be used in their machines, right? And so then how does that affect what that machine shop needs to be with CMMC? And so it's a big question that I've heard from a lot of different perspectives, and there's probably not an easy answer there. But I'll let you try this one first, John, and then we'll see how Ronnie can take it.
So I'm going to respond with the most unsatisfying response imaginable, and that is, it depends. So it depends on the actual information that is in that derived piece of work. You know, how much specificity is there, you know, how much detail. So the details matter is really what I'm getting across. So at the end of the day, you can have those derived works, for no better way to put it, but for us to be able to respond with a specific, you know, a definitive yes, no, maybe, is really dependent on how much other additional detail is in the drawing. So in this case, you know, you take out part numbers, but there's enough information there to really figure out what it goes to and what it's used for. And I'll tell you guys, you know, there's a term called OPSEC, operational security, and I won't look. So, you know, all the companies, raise your hands that love to advertise the contracts you've been awarded, the work that you're doing on your public facing websites. It doesn't take a lot of knowledge to be able to go, all right, so company X here is, you know, they're building Bradley fighting vehicles. Here's this piece of information where, yeah, it doesn't really have part numbers or what have you on it, but it wouldn't be a far leap in logic to associate one with the other. So it goes back to, what's the level of detail, how much other information is out there about the work that you're producing, and how easy is it to connect those dots. I'll pass it over to Ronnie.
Thank you, John. So really tough question here, right? So again, it's about the technical specifications. You know, you might not have a part number on there, but you have all the technical specifications, and it's not something that you produce on the commercial market. High probability it is CUI, and you would need to protect it. But I will say this: when in doubt, you reach out to your prime, who in turn, maybe, hopefully, will reach out to their prime, and we'll work that out as a prime to the government, supporting the government. We will work with the program office to understand, is this technical data, is this considered CUI? Do we need to have additional protections around it, right? So I know we're sort of basing this discussion on CMMC level 3 and CUI, but I tend to think in the much bigger picture, CMMC level 5. The question is, do we think that this is level 5 data, and do we need to have appropriate requirements added for the protection of this type of data? So I will tell you, I always go back to that rule. If there's technical specifications in there that is specific to that particular widget, and that widget, that program where you're building that widget is considered sensitive and there's CUI, there's a high probability that that's going to be CUI. So just, you know, err on the side of caution, you know, reach out. We're here to support, and we're also going to reach out to our government counterparts to get better understanding and feed that information back on down. Over.
All right, thank you. And I'll squeak in one last question. We'll try to keep it quick. And this is about, when is this stuff going to start showing up, specifically CMMC, in RFPs? And because I know there's a lot of stuff going on there, it's a phased rollout. But John, if you want to answer that, and I think we can all chime in a little bit, and then we'll probably conclude today's webinar. Absolutely.
So as I recall the timeline, we could start seeing announcements under the pilots we were talking about just a moment ago, as early as June.
Anything on your side, Ron, that you're seeing or you want to comment on about?
Yeah, so we're actually seeing one RFP out there that's related to CMMC level 3, and we're already in the process of making sure that we're aligned to support that particular program.
Okay. If I could ask everybody to do the exit poll that's in the YouTube description, there's a link there. I'd appreciate it. The one thing I'll also mention about what I've observed in contracts is GSA is now starting to include CMMC in all what's called a GWAC, a government-wide acquisition contract, which typically is awarded, and then they do task orders or something like that on it. And that's so that the DoD can leverage that in out years. So that's occurring today, where I know there's been multiple of those that have come out, and the head of the GSA acquisition on that side has said they're going to be including it in all their GWACs that they're using on the DoD side. So that language is going in there today that will affect downstream activities as well. So again, thank you, John. Thank you, Ron. It's been great having you guys as guests today. If everybody on the webinar could do the exit poll, we appreciate that feedback. It's how we guide future activities. Again, one last thing, if you've got additional questions, you can send it into cmmc-team@exostar.com. We can also share the presentation and continue to support these initiatives. So thanks again, everybody, and it's been a great conversation with you too. Thank you, John and Ron.
Thank you.
Thank you.